Alright, so we're on to part 2 of the small little series of things that I wanted to cover in regards to Stat Revamp, maybe some rebalancing of some things, and building some additional support to help shape the 3 archetypes. Some of this is going to go hand in hand with adding this stuff to monsters. Like, for example, the first thing listed here, the dex based auto hit for players and monsters. And then I want that for monsters because one of the overpowered aspects of the game is the ability to dodge. And I just feel like 95% of the time, if you basically get to a point, you basically get more than 85 extra help to dodge, and whether that's a pure death boost, pure blind, berserk, combination of things, you can't be hit, and it trivializes a lot of the game. But if a monster, so most monsters, like if you see here, most monsters were built on old standards, so they have dexterity. So this monster has 235 strength, 225 dexterity, and 200 endurance. So other than the assistance with initiative that main stat now has, once the battle begins, unless that monster has a ranged attack, it's basically by and large a wasted stat. So in this monster may have some ranged attacks, I'm not sure, but if it doesn't, this monster's lacking a third stat. So that's one of the reasons why I think monsters are basically underpowered. And so a lot of this stuff is not going to be necessarily tied to the style bonus, that it's going to actually be building some back-end support to help shape play styles. So that's the premise of this. But the way this will work is you're going to have a dex divided by 25% rate auto hit with no damage penalty, basically. And so that's going to be 10% rate at 250 dex. Implemented for players and monsters. So this, in my opinion, so basically this is going to be a per hit thing, just like Lucky Strikes. So you can have a 4-hit attack from a monster or from a player, and one of the hits could auto hit, and then, or none of them, or 2 of them, or 3, it just depends on the random number generator. But so even if you have like 150 blind, a monster may be able to get through at least 10% of the time if it has trained dex. Now this is going to work for all attacks, so it's going to carry over to hybridization. So like hybrids could train dexterity, and a mage ranger hybrid or warrior ranger hybrid 10% of the time, if it had 250 dexterity, would get that auto hit feature. So I think this is needed for both to shape the ranger, but also this particular one needs to be given to monsters to help slightly lower what I think is the overpowered dodge mechanic. Number 2, warrior lean for full defensive armors. A lot of people think this should be the style bonus. I do not. I think it should be an addition. Warriors currently do not have a full defensive play style because there's not 100 proc weaponry for warriors. So the proposal is to give, if a warrior is in a full defensive armor, then it's going to get 100% melee, because rangers' bows are 100% melee. Part of the changes that I'm going to ask for is to actually lower bow damage to 90%, and I'll get to that, the reasons why, the couple reasons why. So what I'm advocating for is actually to lower bow damage to 90% melee. You'll see here, but so the way this will work is all melee damage will be increased to 90% melee in the event that they use a melee weapon. This is not part of the style bonus. This is just giving the warriors a full defensive playstyle. Okay, so that needs to be built on the back end as well. Again, it's not a style bonus. Bows lowered back to 90% melee. This is part of a greater rebalancing of both full defensive Beast Ranger versus Lucky Beast Mage and full defensive armors versus neutral. To me, this is going to allow for design space for neutral armors and the standard weapon special, which I think needs to be brought back. It doesn't have to be like a huge focus, but whenever staff makes an old school weapon that had the 20 proc special, it's viewed as not good no matter what armor you use. I personally think that they could make actually armors that actually are specifically designed to boost the weapon special. They could make a MISC, for example, that's specifically designed to boost the weapon special. They can make a weapon that forgoes like all of its bonuses. Like, for example, there are weapons where you intake more damage. You might have a hit point cost. You might have all these things. Well, maybe all of that gets funneled into the weapon special. What we end up having, because a weapon special is 150% melee at 20 proc, you could probably end up causing this to be like better than skill damage with a few tweaks, but with no cost. It's just built into the weapon. I think I think people don't understand that this is that there could be a meta there that is untapped, and they're just not willing to even try it. But I feel strongly about this. And like I said, this is part of a greater rebalancing of full defensive Beast Ranger versus Lucky Beast Mage, which will then also include Beast Warrior in the 20-turn model. Now, the 20-turn model, we all know, is unrealistic. We all know that no battles pretty much last 20 turns. But it's a reference point. It's the basis in which all things are balanced. So if it's the basis in which all things are balanced, part of that has to include build versus build identity. Now, I am certain that staff tries to balance damage strictly from main stats. So when you have intelligence versus strength versus dexterity in terms of the associated weapon and spells over 20 turns, they want those to balance out. But when you start to introduce charisma into the equation and the effect that it has on pets and guests, the full defensive Beast Ranger starts to win out. I'll get into more in this detail in a little bit, but I think this needs to happen in order to rebalance some stuff. All right. I think there needs to be the creation to help shape Rangers, called Ranger Imbues. I think they need to build a quest, kind of like Warrior Tower, or like the Wizard games of old and stuff like that. The creation of the Warrior Tower like area quest, where all the rewards are basically dex-based imbues designed for Rangers. And then there's going to be more item creation as time goes on into the future. By design, these will be like efficient, like, I don't know, like half the cost of normal imbues. They could be like half the power, or they could be like efficient spells. Maybe you get better power out of it. I don't really have a preference. But they'll be like, cheaper SP cost, and basically it's going to focus on status effects. Maybe you could do like damage buffs or some other types of effects, but essentially these will not be element switching effects. So So what'll happen is like full offensive rangers could then imbue, and they can use normal imbues, but they'll just cost more SP. But they could also use these cheaper ones, and then they could attach this to their weapon attacks, or the full defensive version of the ranger. You know, a lot of them like to toggle their bows to like a status mode, and they could either add it with the status, or they could actually keep their bows full damage and then add these on. The spell slot is unused in theory for rangers unless you're a beast ranger. So this will be an opportunity for the non-beast ranger especially to have things that's designed for them. So they'll be basically Dex Major Inflict. So they're ranger imbues is what this is. You can do anything from increased damage, BTH, status stuff, but like I said, never actually going to be element switching. This is going to be integral item support to ranger gameplay. So again, this is going to basically be an idea that's going to shape their gameplay. Alright, spell scrolls. So spell scrolls will be basically imbues that work for spells. These also will not be element changing. These will be focused on status effects that will be attached to the spell that you cast. They'll be MP costed quick cast. So obviously these will have to take up a spell slot, but if I wanted to add blind, for example, I could do a blind scroll to all my spells. Or if I wanted to do a panic scroll, I could add panic to all my spells. So the focus here is on status inflictions. The idea here is to promote spell casting. That needs to happen. So that's what the whole idea here is, again. Alright, so now we're getting into some nitty-gritty of charisma, and this is going to start to introduce some of the reasoning behind what I mentioned with rangers, as well as get into a little bit of the math, which I'm not solely focused on, but I'm trying to give explanations here. But there needs to be a complete redesign of guests and one minor change to pets. Alright, so the first thing is I think guests should get lucky strikes, but follow the new lucky strike rate damage changes, which I will cover with the stat portion of the revamp. MP upkeep guests to be worth 60% melee. This is without lucky strikes, so one of the things that I'll talk about is lucky strikes will actually be in addition to any damage in the game. And it'll be a luck-based style bonus. Currently, I think lucky strikes is counted within assumed damage. I know that the BTH and blocking from luck is counted in the assumed amounts there. Just to give you a teaser, I think a decoupling of luck completely from any of the base standard assumptions needs to happen so that you can shape luck to be its own thing. So basically, I propose 262 MP a turn without any charisma. And then SP upkeep will be 45%. I mentioned earlier, I think that call guests need to be worth 45% melee. I'll cover this in a little while. That's without lucky strikes. And then SP upkeep will drop back down to 98, which is I think the current amount, or that'll be the amount without charisma investment. Alright, so 250 charisma investment will reduce your upkeeps, 131. So basically 131 would be 2,620 MP after 20 turns, so it's the same cost as casting 4 spells. The guest and an MP upkeep replaces the spell. So with mages, they are assumed to use spells. So you train intelligence, you're assumed to use a spell. You have 8 slots that are supposed to represent the 8 different standard elements. So if you replaced the 8 standard elements spells with 8 standard elements guests in terms of cost, then what you need to do then to make guest upkeep, you should make it equal spell cost in 20 turns. Okay, so that's where I'm deriving this amount. Again, 4 spell casts over 20 turns is the standard. That costs 2,620 MP. So you basically take that cost divided by 20 turns and you get 131 MP a turn. That is with charisma. Okay. For SP, charisma investment will reduce the 98 SP a turn down to 49. So what that means is the call guest will be worth 45% melee. However, it's only going to cost, with 250 charisma investment, 49 SP a turn. And that's going to be your trade-off. So you're going to have your pet will count towards 40% melee for free, and then your guest will be 45% melee if it's a call guest for just 49 SP. So you're only going to be using half of your SP to fuel your guest, leaving the other half to be invested elsewhere for rangers and warriors. Alright? So I'm trying to provide SP help for those builds. They're going to need it because of the plan changes to the upkeeps without charisma investment. Alright, the guest BTH will solely be based on charisma, no other stat. So it'll be like whatever they decide. And then, so non-charisma users will really struggle to have a standard guest land hits. Pet BTH will be basically the formula will be I think it'll either be charisma or the highest of main stat. Basically the idea is so that non-charisma users can get 85% accuracy for pets. A pet's supposed to be worth 40% melee if you train charisma, and it's supposed to be 20% melee without in the damage models. And it's actually less than 20% because of the BTH loss, so they're going to just fix this. Isn't different from what's being proposed. I may have worded it different, but I don't remember if it's half and half or if it's charisma, but if you don't have charisma, then it's highest of main stat. I think that's what it might be. Maybe a little different than what I typed there. Alright, so explanation for the redesign of the guest structure. Alright, so first of all, guest melee evaluations is to not consider lucky strikes. Guests should have always had lucky strikes in my opinion, but luck needs decoupled from any standard assumptions tied to main stats. So lucky strikes must then be extra. Alright, so lucky strikes, another teaser. The damage that they provide, some consider to be kind of too high. I don't necessarily disagree, but if it's going to be a style bonus, probably too high. So NP upkeep guest replaces a mage spell slot. Like I talked about, spells are assumed in the model. So a new assumption basically here, when a mage trains charisma as a secondary, there'll be a brand new assumption that the mage may choose a guest summons in place of the spell. Alright. Our ranger and warrior's guest slot replace nothing, as these slots are not assumed. Going forward, if you train strength or dex and charisma, there will be a new assumption that a guest is used. And I just sort of feel like, why wouldn't it? So a beast mage's damage over 20 turns, basically, so it's actually worse than this right now due to the BTH issues, but let's assume that that's fixed. So you're going to have, so this is a beast mage, so what we're going to assume here is all the spell slots are guests. So you can pick any element. So they're going to use 20 weapon attacks. So you got 75% melee times 20 turns, you get 1500%, and 20 guest attacks, which is 60 times 20, which is 1200%, and 20 pet attacks, which is 40 times 20 turns, 800%, for a grand total of 3500% melee over 20 turns. A full defensive beast ranger and then also a beast warrior, if you reduce bows to 90% and you reduce guests to 45%, the call guests. So you now do the math. So basically you get 20 turns of bows, 20 turns of guests at 45%, and 20 turns of pets. And now you get a grand total of 3500% melee. Currently, with the SP upkeep guests at 60% and bows at 100%, a full defensive beast ranger is 4000%. So they're currently 500% more melee over 20 turns. It's actually more than that if you consider the accuracy that a lucky beast mage pet and guest does not have. I feel like if you're going to make damage the same with just main stat, when you introduce charisma and you're gaining the extra damage from pets and guests, it should also be the same. So this is a rebalancing of those. So basically you're going to have two different standards, one based on MP upkeep guests and one based on SP upkeep guests. I think that's the only real way to balance guests in this game. If you make it universal, it's a band-aid. And so this is just an attempt to actually fix the wound. They probably should not have made MP upkeep guests, but that can't be undone. You're going to have to delete the items. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. So you need to go a different route and actually fix it. So this will actually balance, for example, Beast Ranger versus Beast Mage. Whether it's a luck-based or an endurance-based build. And then also Beast Warrior if you add that in. And this will also simultaneously mean that you're going to reopen neutraline armors to some design space by lowering the bow damage. You could leave guest damage the same as you could leave it at 60% melee, but in order to get to 3500% melee over 20 turns, you'd have to lower bow damage all the way down to 75%. What that ends up doing is that kills the non-beast variant ranger, and they would just have 75% melee. And so that's probably not an answer. So you have to kind of piecemeal it, so to speak, and lower both bows slightly and guests slightly to get there. Now keep this in mind. For anyone balking at the idea that rangers or beast rangers or whatever will be unusable or too nerfed or whatever, I'm actually lowering it down to be equal to like Lucky Beast Mage. Keep in mind, Lucky Beast Mage is having to replace its spell, and then it's going to be basically still using its MP bar in order to maintain this damage. However, Rangers and Beast Warriors using SP upkeep guests are only spending 49 SP a turn for the guests. This allows for better management of SP. They're going to be able to use their SP for whatever. Keep in mind, remember I created the efficient Ranger imbues, so they're going to be able to have that extra SP to be able to do this a few turns every so often. So I've kept this in mind with this model, okay? And so that's it for some of the back end stuff that needs to happen. I think that while some of this may be a pretty large departure from the norm, I think it's the only way to go to fix actual balance, build versus build balance, archetype versus archetype balance, and as well as actually deal with the issue that the guests create with their original creation way back in the beginning. But that's it for this video. Next I'll cover what I think the style bonuses should be, which will be the final nail in helping shape build identity.